You keep falling for the same kind of person, not the same face, but the same silence, the same ache. You tell yourself, I can't explain it. It just feels right. But what if that rightness was simply repetition in disguise? Jung once said, what is not brought to consciousness will be lived out as fate. This video isn't about love. It's about why your nervous system keeps mistaking pain for love, again and again. Skip it, and you'll keep calling it chemistry. Watch it, and you might finally understand why you've been choosing ghosts. Take a breath. We're going back to the room where it all began.
Welcome back to Mind Lens. Tonight you find yourself in a room that feels older than your memories, though you've been here before. The light is low, the wallpaper faintly peeling at the corners, and there's a small ticking sound, soft like breath caught in a quiet throat. Somewhere, a draft stirs the curtain just slightly, and in the distance a floorboard creaks, not because someone walked over it, but because something wants to be remembered. This is not your house, not exactly, but it's a house that lives inside you. The scent in the air is oddly familiar, maybe baby powder, maybe cold dust, and somewhere on the edge of your senses, a lullaby is playing, but no one is singing it. You're not quite alone. You're never really alone in this room, and yes, your ego might not make it through unscathed. That's okay. So, before we dive in, tap that like button and subscribe to Mind Lens. Only if these midnight mind voyages truly speak to you. Let's see how far across the map of consciousness we stretch tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't remember this moment exactly. You weren't old enough to store it in words or images, but something in you remembers. A parent turned away too long, a bottle warmed just a little too late, a cry that wasn't answered on the first call, or the third. These are not catastrophes, these are micro-discoveries, discoveries that the world doesn't always rush to meet you. You are very small, and the room is very big. And somewhere before language, your body starts keeping score. You learn something, in this space, something so subtle you'd never think to question it. Whether love comes fast or slow, whether your needs are an annoyance or an invitation, whether being seen is safe or dangerous. You wouldn't call it trauma. That word belongs to sharp edges. This is different. This is the quiet shaping of your nervous system in a pattern you will one day call love. Later you might say, I don't know why I'm drawn to them. There's just something. But that something has a name. It's familiarity, dressed in 1,000 coats, some warm, some suffocating. One study on infant caregiver attachment found that children as young as 12 months begin to anticipate how their cries will be answered. If no one comes quickly, they cry softer. If no one comes at all, they stop crying entirely, not because they're calm, but because their biology begins to conserve hope. You don't choose these strategies. They're gifted to you by necessity, and those same strategies, how you wait, how you long, how you protect yourself from being too much, don't leave with the crib. They grow up, they wear perfume and text late at night and feel like butterflies when they leave the room. But beneath it all, they're just reenactments of this room. The room where it began. Sometimes your relationships are haunted, not by other people's ghosts, but by your own echo. The echo of learning whether your voice matters, whether your existence moves others, whether your presence is enough. Psychologists still argue whether attachment styles are fixed or flexible. Some say the early years are everything. Others insist that new love can rewire old pain. Both are right. But both agree on one thing. Your first relationships teach you how the world works, and your body doesn't forget the lesson. Do you remember that old dream you used to have? The one where you're shouting underwater and no sound comes out? It's not random. Dreams remember what you repress. And sometimes, what they're replaying is this: the helplessness of loving before being loved. Back. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out softly through parted lips. Just once. Feel your shoulders settle into gravity. Let the weight of memory be less sharp, more like rain on old stone. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But before you accept yourself, you have to know where that self was first shaped. Tonight, that's where we begin. Not with theories or timelines, but with a question floating in the dust of an old room. What if the way you love now was shaped by a moment you can't even remember? Let that question hang, like a mobile above a crib, and as the room fades into the next, you drift forward, still carrying the weight of what was never said and what your nervous system never forgot.
You drift into another room, not a real one perhaps, but one stitched from the seams of your earliest patterns. The walls here don't echo, they repeat. Every gesture bounces back not once, but again and again, like the same lullaby looping from a broken music box. This is the room of repetition, and you are not yet you. Not fully. You're still soft clay, waiting to be shaped by a hand, a voice, a gaze. A mother leans over you, but maybe not at the right moment. A father lifts you up, but maybe not every time. Maybe sometimes you're held. Maybe sometimes you're met with silence, and your brain, barely formed, starts building blueprints. They don't look like memories. They look like habits of the heart. Psychologists call them attachment templates, the deep-seated expectations you form about what love will feel like, long before you know what the word love even means. They aren't thoughts. They're patterns. You don't think them. You become them. A child craves safety, but also predictability. If a parent is consistently responsive, the child learns, I can reach out. I will be held. But if the response is erratic, the child learns something else. I must work harder to be loved, or quieter to be tolerated. And so, your first romance isn't with a person, it's with a pattern. Not, do they love me? But, how do I need to be in order to be loved? This becomes the first game of your life and also the most tragic one, because you win the game by losing yourself. Fast forward, you're grown now. But strangely, some part of you still reacts like that child, flinching when someone takes too long to reply, shrinking when a partner seems distant, overflowing with warmth when someone gives just a little bit of approval. It's not desperation, it's recognition. You're not trying to be needy. You're trying to make sense of a blueprint you never chose, but deeply internalized. A well-known 20th century psychologist once observed that we are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love. What he left unsaid is this: we are never so vulnerable to repetition as when we think we've fallen into something new. And here's the twist. You're not always drawn to what's good for you. You're drawn to what's familiar. You might meet someone who's warm, emotionally available, grounded, and still feel nothing. But someone inconsistent, unpredictable, vaguely withholding. Suddenly you're obsessed. Your body calls it chemistry, but it's not chemistry, it's choreography. You're dancing a dance you learned in the crib, and like any old waltz, your feet know the steps before your brain catches on. Breathe here. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Gently, slowly. Let the thoughts settle like dust on a windowsill. Maybe I wasn't flawed. Maybe I was just adapting to inconsistency. Let that sentence float. Somewhere in history, a French child psychiatrist named René Spitz observed infants in orphanages. The babies were fed, changed, kept warm, but they weren't held. Many of them developed what he called hospitalism. Some stopped crying. Some even stopped smiling. Their bodies were safe, but their minds withered in absence. You don't have to grow up in an orphanage to feel the ache of emotional vacancy. Sometimes the room was full, but it wasn't attuned. You could be surrounded by people and still starved for resonance. That's the cruelty of early misattunement. It teaches you to expect connection through contortion, to bend in just the right way so that someone else might finally look at you with soft eyes. And so it begins. The training. Be funny, be smart, be useful, be easy, be silent, be perfect. Be anything that keeps love near, even if it costs you your own voice. And when it works, When someone responds to the performance, it feels like love. But it isn't love. It's reward. And reward isn't intimacy. It's control. Now, years later, you wonder why you feel so tired in relationships, why you're always scanning for tone shifts, why you say it's fine when it isn't. It's not weakness. It's muscle memory. This is the second room in the house of your attachments, the room of repeated effort, the room where love isn't just felt, it's earned. You don't need to judge yourself for it. You need to see it. Because seeing it is how you start choosing different. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands rest. You don't need to hold anything up right now. You don't need to perform for the voice in your head. There's an old Zen koan that says, when you meet the Buddha, on the road, kill him, not because wisdom is false, but because what you seek outside is already inside. So too with love. What you chase in others was always meant to be remembered within yourself. Now the walls fade again, and the room softens. The repetition slows. You step through to the next space, not with fear, but with something closer to curiosity. You're ready to look back, not to blame, but to understand. The air shifts. You move softly into a quieter space, one not lined with books or toys or wallpaper, but with absences. A blank wall, a closed door, a question that was never answered. This is the room of silence, and you know it well, even if you've never named it. There was a time when you reached for comfort, and none came. Not out of malice, just absence. A parent lost in their own world, a caregiver too tired, too distracted, too buried in their own unhealed wounds. And in that space of unmet need, your nervous system didn't just register loss, it recalibrated. You didn't stop needing, you just stopped expecting. It's easy to talk about trauma in terms of what was done to you, but sometimes the deeper imprint comes from what was never done at all, not the blow, the blank. Developmental psychologists call this invisible trauma, the kind that comes not from chaos but from emotional neglect so subtle it rarely makes it into memory. You were clothed, fed, perhaps even tucked in, but your emotions had nowhere to land, and so they circled, quietly, like moths, to a light that never turned on. You grow up not knowing what to call that hunger. It's not physical, it's not dramatic, but it's there, in how you feel inexplicably lonely even in good company, or how you go numb in moments of intimacy, like your body is somewhere 5 seconds behind your heart. You learned early that your needs weren't the problem, they were the burden, so you adapted. You became low maintenance, easy, the one who didn't ask for much, but of course you still wanted love. So badly it ached. Only now, you didn't know how to ask for it, at least not directly, so you found other ways. Maybe you became the fixer, the achiever, the giver. Maybe you fell in love with broken people and called it purpose. Maybe you learned to listen so well that you forgot how to speak, and when someone finally didn't neglect you, when they offered real, consistent presence, you felt unsettled, suspicious, maybe even bored, because your body wasn't used to being seen without working for it. So you went back to chasing, not because it made you happy, but because it felt like home. This is where the voice that never answered becomes the person you now pursue. Someone distant, inconsistent, distracted, and your old ache rises again, not as memory, but as desire. If I can just make them love me, maybe I wasn't too much. Maybe I was never the problem. This isn't neediness. It's unfinished business. The unconscious drive to finally complete the emotional loop you were forced to abandon as a child. There's a paradox here. You long to be chosen by someone who resembles the very person who once didn't choose you. Not because it's logical, but because it's familiar. You don't fall in love with people. You fall in love with possibility, the possibility that this time, someone will stay, someone will look, someone will hear. But that longing has a cost. Because when you're constantly trying to earn love, you lose track of when it's actually being given. You miss the quiet partner who offers you steadiness. You misread kindness as disinterest. You chase after signals that confuse you, not because you enjoy confusion, but because that's the language your heart first learned. Take a breath here. Feel the air pass through your nose and out your lips. Let your chest expand and then fall back into gravity. You don't need to be angry with your caregivers. This isn't about blame. Most of them were doing the best they could with what they had. But that doesn't erase what your body learned in their silence. As Jung put it, nothing has a stronger influence than the unlived life of the parent. And sometimes their unlived life became your unmet need, and so you carry it. In how you speak, in who you choose, in how you leave. But there's something beautiful in recognizing this. You were never broken. You were just waiting for an answer that didn't come. And now you get to decide if you'll keep waiting. Or if you'll begin listening to a voice that was never silent, just unheard. Not theirs, yours. As you drift from this room, you don't slam the door. You leave it ajar. Because some silences don't need to be filled. They just need to be aimed. The next room is dimmer, but not darker. The light here comes from within, soft, amber, flickering like the reflection from a quiet fireplace. There's a mirror on the wall, but it doesn't show your face exactly. It shows a version of you. One you've been trying to live up to for years. This is the room of the mirror that lied. You see, it wasn't just neglect or absence that shaped you. Sometimes it was presence. The wrong kind. The kind that made you feel you had to be someone to be loved, that you had to shine to be seen. Maybe they praised you when you smiled, when you won, when you behaved. Maybe they called you strong, mature for your age. So easy. But rarely did they ask, "What are you feeling?" And so you learned. Being loved means being acceptable. Being acceptable means becoming the version of you they liked best. The psychological term is false self. It's not deception, it's survival. Children are astonishingly adaptive. If the authentic self isn't mirrored back, if your sadness, your rage, your confusion is met with discomfort, dismissal, or subtle withdrawal, you learn to edit yourself, to show only what is welcomed, to hide what is inconvenient, and the mirror begins to lie. You look into it and see someone smiling, accomplished, agreeable. But inside, there's a quiet scream. That's not all of me. This distorted reflection doesn't disappear with age. It follows you into adulthood, into boardrooms, first dates, dinner parties. You instinctively perform the version of you you believe will be embraced, and in love. That's where it gets especially tricky. Because when you fall for someone, you're not just falling for them, you're falling for the reflection they offer you. Do they make you feel needed, special, chosen? Then suddenly the mirror lights up, but that glow is addictive and fragile. You begin to fear their disappointment. You anticipate their reactions before they happen. You shape-shift, just slightly, to keep that mirror kind. And before long, you're not loving them. You're loving the version of yourself they allow you to be. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. You hold back your full truth. You hide your anxiety. You downplay your dreams. Not because you want to, so it's because you're terrified of being unloved without the mask. Here's where the irony sets in. You say you want love. But what you actually crave is acceptance of the self you never got to be. And so, you keep falling for mirrors. For people who reflect just enough of your worth back at you to keep the performance going. But what happens when they stop? What happens when their gaze falters or their reflection darkens? You panic, you grasp, you fight to maintain the image. Because if they stop seeing the version you crafted, you fear they'll stop seeing you at all. This is how the mirror becomes a prison. You begin to confuse being loved with being curated. But love, real love, is not about staying within someone else's frame. It's about being seen when you've stepped outside of it. Let that settle. Take a slow breath and imagine the mirror softening, the surface rippling like water. You don't have to break it. Just stop believing it. Stop believing that who you are when no one's looking is less worthy than the version you show. There's a famous Gestalt exercise called the empty chair. You sit across from an invisible parent, lover, or authority figure, and you say what you've never been able to say. It feels silly at first. But then something unlocks, because sometimes the words you've swallowed for decades finally hear themselves aloud. What would you say to the person who first taught you to shrink? What would you say to the mirror? You don't have to know yet. Just know that one day the mirror cracks, not as a wound, but as a release. And when it does, you might finally see the face behind it, the one that doesn't need fixing, the one that was never broken, the one that's been waiting for you to recognize it, not in someone else's eyes, but in your own. You step out of the room now gently, not with shame, not with regret, but with a strange new softness, like the first time you realize you've been clenching your jaw for years without knowing. You exhale, and the reflection fades. You enter the next room slowly, not because you're afraid, but because something ancient is stirring here. Something you've felt your whole life, though you've never quite found the words for it. This is the room of hunger in disguise. First glance, it looks like longing. That flutter in your chest when someone texts back. The ache when they don't. The magnetic pull towards certain people. The ones with the mysterious eyes. The slow replies. The emotional temperature that never quite settles. But beneath the surface, that pull isn't about love. It's about something older. It's about hunger. Not for food, not for pleasure, but for a particular kind of attention. The kind you didn't get enough of, or didn't get at the right time. The kind your nervous system memorized as necessary, even sacred. When you're a child, your brain and body learn from rhythm, from how consistently your needs are met. But if that rhythm is off, too late, too cold, too conditional, you develop a quiet ache. One that follows you like a scent you can't place. And so later in life, when you meet someone who gives just enough to keep you leaning forward, but not enough to let you rest, your body reacts. It doesn't say, "This is dangerous." It says, "This is familiar. Keep chasing." You mistake the ache for chemistry, for love, for proof that this connection must be real, because why else would it feel so intense? But intensity is not intimacy. Intensity is often just the echo of absence, made louder by time and unmet needs. Psychologists have a name for this: anxious, preoccupied attachment. It's not a flaw. It's a strategy. A way your body learned to stay close to people who are emotionally inconsistent. You learn to work for love, to wait, to hope, and that waiting wired your hunger into your bones. Now, when someone mirrors that same pattern, distant, cool, unpredictable, it doesn't feel unsafe. It feels like home. You don't know why, but you lean in harder. You text more. You worry more. You fantasize, not because they're giving more, but because your hunger is louder. It's not about who they are. It's about what they activate. And that activation isn't love. It's your nervous system recognizing a survival loop it once relied on. Let that sink in, not as blame, but as clarity. Take a long breath here. Let your shoulders fall. Feel the way your body has been carrying this pattern like a second skin. Now imagine what it would feel like to want someone, not because they remind you of what you lacked, but because they meet you in what you now know you deserve. It's a different sensation. Less thrilling, perhaps, less chaotic, but also less hollow. There's a strange experiment from the 1950s, the Harlow monkey study, in which baby monkeys were given two mothers, one made of wire that provided milk, and one made of soft cloth that offered no food, just warmth. Despite the wire mother meeting the survival need, the babies clung to the cloth mother, even when hungry, even when scared. We are wired for comfort, for resonance, for emotional nourishment. But when that comfort is unreliable, our hunger twists. We stop seeking the soft presence. We start craving the one that gives us just enough to keep us coming back. And in doing so, we confuse deprivation with desire. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is that moment. The moment you recognize that what you've been calling love may actually be the mind's attempt to complete a pattern it never chose. That's not fate. That's wiring. And wiring can be rewired, not overnight, not without discomfort, but slowly, like relearning how to breathe. Start here. Feel your feet, the texture of the floor beneath them, the weight of your body supported, not judged, not watched, just held by the earth beneath. Now ask yourself, am I chasing this person, or am I chasing a feeling I once missed? That question won't answer everything, but it will begin to unmask the hunger, and as that hunger becomes visible, you begin, very gently, to feed it yourself, not through obsession, not through control, but through presence. The same presence you always needed. The same presence you now have the power to give. To yourself, first. You glance back at the room of hunger, and you no longer feel afraid. You feel informed. And that's how healing begins, not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. Oh, that's what this was. You enter a room you've visited before, but always with different eyes. This is the room of attraction, of obsession, of late-night thoughts and unanswered messages, of eyes you can't stop thinking about, even when you know they've looked through you. This is the room of your favorite kind of pain. You wouldn't call it that out loud, of course. You'd call it romance, passion, maybe even destiny. But underneath the thrill, the butterflies, the longing, there's an ache. And if you sit with it long enough, you'll see it's not new. It's the same ache you felt when you were small, waiting for someone to pick you up, to answer, to say, I see you. You think you're drawn to these people because of who they are. But the truth is more difficult. You're drawn to them because of what they trigger. The cold one, the unpredictable one, the emotionally absent one, the intense one who disappears. These people aren't bad, but they feel like home, not because they love you better, but because they awaken the pattern your nervous system expects. Psychologists call it repetition compulsion. Freud named it. Jung expanded it. And you're living it. It means we're drawn to situations that mimic our earliest unresolved emotional experiences, not to suffer, but to finally master them. But here's the trap. You rarely master them. You replay them. You keep finding partners who make you feel not enough, not quite loved, always almost there. And when they leave, or when you finally leave, you call it heartbreak. But heartbreak isn't always about loss. Sometimes it's the breaking of an illusion that this time, if you just love harder, stay longer, shrink smaller, perform better, the person will finally give you what your childhood self never received. But they don't. They can't. Because that version of the wound doesn't live in them, it lives in you. Take a breath, one hand on your belly, feel it rise, hold, then release, like you're letting go of a name you've been trying to earn. You don't choose these people consciously. Your body chooses. Your heart hears a voice it remembers and says, there, that one. And when the pain comes, it doesn't scare you. It reassures you. Because it's the pain you know best. Your favorite kind of pain. That's why you stay too long. That's why you justify their distance. That's why you over-explain your feelings while they under-deliver theirs. You don't want drama. You want repair. But you've confused repair with repetition. There's an old folktale of a man who keeps walking into a forest and getting lost. Every time, he promises to mark the trees, take a new path, learn the way out. But the forest rearranges itself, because it's not the forest that traps him. It's the map in his own hand. You may be doing the same. The person you're drawn to might not be the one. They might just be the pattern, and your nervous system doesn't want peace. It wants familiar resolution. But that's a moving target, one you'll never quite reach because it was never about them. Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power. But in many relationships, you feel a subtle power struggle. Can I finally get this person to love me the way I always needed? And so the drama begins. You don't need to shame yourself for this. You need to understand that your attraction isn't a betrayal of logic. It's a memorial to your unmet need. But here's the beautiful part. Once seen clearly, the spell weakens. Suddenly the thrilling becomes exhausting, the chase becomes hollow, and you begin to crave something quieter. Not the firework, but the fireplace. Let that craving rise. It won't feel dramatic. It will feel unfamiliar. It may even feel boring at first, because your nervous system doesn't know how to rest in warmth. But you will learn. And one day, you'll meet someone who doesn't activate your hunger, but meets your presence. Someone who doesn't make you work to be loved, but reminds you that you already are. That kind of love might not shake your world, but it will hold it, and you'll realize something quietly astonishing. Safety isn't boring. It's revolutionary. You turn now, walking out of the room of ache a little slower, a little surer. Not because the pain is gone, but because for the first time, you've stopped calling it love. You step into a room that almost isn't there. No walls, no doors, just stillness. It's not absence. It's presence without pressure. And that's exactly the point. This is the room of the invisible parent. They weren't abusive. They didn't yell. They may have even said, "I love you" out loud, but their presence was hollow, like a radio on mute. They provided what they were told a parent should provide: food, shelter, rules, but not attunement, not emotional resonance, not the feeling of being felt. You were seen, but not seen into. That kind of parenting doesn't leave bruises. It leaves gaps, tiny persistent hollows in the places where closeness was supposed to grow. You walked into a room, and nothing lit up. You shared a feeling, and it bounced back like a pebble off a concrete wall. It's the kind of invisibility that doesn't make you scream, it makes you perform. Perform to be noticed, perform to be remembered, perform to feel real, and over time, you learn that your existence depends not on being, but on being useful. This, too, shapes how you love. You fall for people who demand a lot. Emotionally unavailable? You're on it. Emotionally volatile? Even better. The more you have to work to be acknowledged, the more valuable the reward feels, because deep down, you still carry the belief, if I can just get someone like them to finally choose me, I will finally become real. It's not conscious. It's woven into the foundation. You think you want love, but what you really want is to be perceived, to have someone's gaze rest on you long enough for you to feel like you exist. This is the legacy of the invisible parent. Jung once said, "The parent complex is the most sensitive point in the psyche." And it's true. You can spend a lifetime chasing validation without realizing you're chasing a parent-shaped ghost. Maybe that ghost is a father who was always at work. Maybe it's a mother who smiled but never noticed when you were sad. Maybe it's someone who was physically there, but emotionally unreachable, and because you couldn't reach them then, you keep reaching now. But not toward them, toward their echoes, in lovers, in friends, in bosses, in anyone who withholds attention just enough to keep your childhood wiring alive. It's not romantic. It's recognition. Your nervous system has been trained to equate love with effort, presence with tension, self-worth with usefulness. So when someone shows up calm, consistent, and safe, you might not feel moved, not because they lack something, but because they don't resemble the parent who didn't. And somewhere inside, a child still whispers, "What if I'm only lovable to the ones who can't see me?" But here's the quiet revolution. You can unlearn the choreography. Start with stillness. Take a breath. Let your spine rest into your chair or mattress. Feel the air press lightly against your skin. Not demanding, not dramatic. Just there. This is what presence feels like when it's not hungry. You don't need to earn this moment. You don't need to fix it, explain it, or shrink yourself to fit inside it. You just get to exist. That's the gift you were supposed to receive. Not approval, not applause, just attuned witnessing. And now, as the adult, you can begin to give that gift to yourself. You won't always get it right. You'll slip. You'll crave intensity again. But in moments like this, when the room is still and your breath is slow, you'll remember, you're not invisible. You never were. You just weren't mirrored. And now, as the mirror returns, You begin to reflect something softer, something truer. You're not the echo of what someone failed to notice. You are the noticing itself. You step gently from this room, less like a wound, more like a whisper, and the whisper says, I see you. You step into a dream now, though it doesn't feel like one of yours. It feels borrowed, secondhand. The air is heavy with déjà vu, with a script you didn't write but somehow know by heart. This is the room where ghost chases ghost. You're not alone in here. There's someone across from you, someone you've loved, or thought you loved. Their face flickers. Sometimes they resemble your first love, sometimes your mother, sometimes your most recent heartbreak, and sometimes you. This is where patterns reenact themselves, not as punishment but as unfinished stories. You enter relationships with hope, with intention, with desire, but then, inexplicably, the same old dance begins. You give too much, you stay too long, you feel too little, or everything all at once. They withdraw, or they explode, or they disappear, and you're left wondering, why does this keep happening? But the better question is, what story am I trying to complete? Because beneath every entanglement is a psychic rehearsal. A rehearsal for the moment someone finally stays, or finally sees, or finally forgives, or finally holds. But they never quite do, because they can't. Because they're not the original ghost. They're just playing the part you unconsciously cast them in. There's a concept in depth psychology called transference. It describes the phenomenon where you project old feelings, usually about a parent, onto someone else, usually someone new. You're not seeing them. You're seeing your past, in costume. And they're not always innocent either, because they too have ghosts. And sometimes those ghosts recognize yours. And before long, you're both reenacting traumas you never healed, mirroring wounds instead of offering medicine. It's a duet of shadows, no villains, just echoes. Take a breath here, slow. Feel the weight of your ribs expand and soften. Let yourself pause inside that recognition. Maybe we weren't in love. Maybe we were just trying to finish a story we never got to end. One of the most haunting aspects of childhood wounding is its unfinishedness. A goodbye that never came. A comfort never received. A voice that said, I love you too late or not at all. And so you seek that ending again. In partners, in arguments, in longing, you revisit the same emotions, hoping for a new conclusion. But here's the twist. When we unconsciously cast others in old roles, we don't change the story. We repeat it, and repetition is not resolution. This is why the relationship feels so intense. It's not about this moment. It's about all the moments it's made of. You're holding not just the current disappointment, but years of unresolved grief, unmet needs, unspoken questions. And your partner may be doing the same. Two ghosts, circling, hoping one of you will say the thing that should have been said long ago. But ghosts don't speak. They haunt. So how do you break the spell? By remembering that the story isn't yours to finish with them. It's yours to finish within yourself. Jung once said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. But the child grows up, and with awareness, with breath, with presence, you can choose to live your life, not theirs. To love without reenactment, to speak without projection, to see another not as an echo but as themselves. But to do that, you have to turn inward first. You have to ask, who am I actually speaking to when I'm begging for closeness? Is it this partner, or someone from long ago? Is it the lover who leaves, or the parent who never really arrived? In this room, the ghosts begin to fade, not because they're gone, but because they've been seen. You no longer need to chase them, because the story is not unfinished. You were just never told. You were allowed to close the book. Now you gently walk forward, not to find another actor for your play, but to begin living a life not written by ghosts. The next room feels different, not heavier, not lighter, just eerily familiar. You pause in the doorway because you've been here before, many times, with many faces. The room rearranges itself depending on who you bring with you. But one thing never changes, the feeling that you've known this person forever. This is the room of the stranger who feels like home. You meet someone. Their smile is crooked in a way that makes your chest ache. Their silence feels like a dare. Their presence is electric, but not in a bright, sunny way. It's more like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind pulling at your coat. It feels dangerous, but also right. You call it chemistry, or soul recognition, or fate. You feel inexplicably drawn to them, not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually. You say things like, "We just clicked," or "I feel like I've known them forever." But what you're actually recognizing isn't them. It's the emotional environment they create, the one your nervous system was wired to find normal. They might ignore you just enough, praise you unpredictably, withdraw when you're most vulnerable, and your heart races, not with joy but with a kind of high-stakes anxiety your body mistakes for love. You aren't drawn to this person because of who they are. You're drawn to the pattern they activate because, somewhere long ago, this is what home felt like: unpredictable, conditional, intense. The stranger feels like home because home was never safe. You learned that love comes with tension, that attention must be earned. That closeness is something you chase, not something you're offered freely. And so now, in adulthood, when someone replicates that pattern, you light up. Not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. You're not falling in love. You're falling into a loop. This doesn't mean the person is bad, but if you're honest, the connection feels less like a sanctuary and more like an audition. You try to be perfect, not because they demand it, but because your body believes it must be perfect to be chosen. This is the deep legacy of early attachment, trauma. It trains you to mistrust peace and crave complexity. You say you want a calm, loving partner, but when they arrive, you feel restless. They don't light the spark. They don't keep you guessing. They don't resemble the old emotional roller coaster you've come to associate with meaning. You begin to confuse emotional safety with emotional flatness, and that confusion is one of the final defenses of the wounded child, because safety requires receiving without performance, and that can feel naked, vulnerable, unfair even. You think, why should I let someone love me if I haven't earned it yet? But real love doesn't need to be earned. Only reenacted pain requires currency. Take a long, slow breath, in through your nose. Hold it at the top. Now exhale slowly, like letting go of a version of yourself you no longer need. Let the breath carry this question. Is this person home, or is this person a haunting? That's not always easy to answer. Because the stranger who feels like home often mirrors a part of you that still believes love means longing. And longing feels romantic because it's what your heart remembers most vividly. But real connection isn't marked by longing. It's marked by ease. And ease can feel boring to someone raised in tension. Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." You could say the same of toxic attraction. It's a substitute for grieving the love you never got. It's a beautiful lie that keeps you from feeling the emptiness of what's missing. But you can feel that emptiness now, and not drown in it. You can say, "This feels like home," but that doesn't mean I have to stay. You can let go of the spark that burns too fast. You can stop calling chaos chemistry. You can stop assuming love has to hurt to be real. You deserve a love that feels like rest, not a test. You step out of the room quietly, not running, not retreating, just ready to walk toward something that doesn't set your nervous system on fire. Because this time, home doesn't have to feel like survival. The room you step into now is quiet, not just on the outside, but inside you as well. There's no chase here, no echo, no ancient pull, just a chair, a faint breeze, and a mirror that doesn't distort. This is the room where you ask the hardest question of all. Is this love? Or is this projection? It's not an accusation. It's a turning point. You've learned that not all attraction is truth. Not every spark means you found the one. Sometimes you've found someone who fits the outline you've been carrying around since you were 5. They say a few words. Their expression flickers just so. They show a glimmer of withdrawal or softness, and your unconscious mind lights up like a switchboard. That's the one. But is it? Or are you looking at a person through the filter of your own unmet needs? Projection is not deception. It's not manipulation. It's how the psyche tries to resolve unfinished business. You're not seeing the person. You're seeing the role they've stepped into. Sometimes, it's the mother who never truly noticed you. Sometimes, the father who never praised you. Sometimes, the sibling who overshadowed you. Sometimes it's the version of yourself you were never allowed to become. You cast the people you love into a story long before they've spoken their lines. And it goes both ways, because just as you project onto them, they project onto you. Their inner child chooses you, their shadows cling to you, their own ghosts whisper through your name, and the result? You both begin acting, not out of malice but memory. There's an old quote attributed to Jung: "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Sometimes love is one of those disguises. You're not falling for a person. You're falling into a pattern, hoping this time it ends differently. So how do you know if it's projection? You look for the clues. Are you more in love with the potential of the person than the reality? Do you feel addicted to their approval, terrified of their withdrawal? Do you feel compelled to prove your worth, even when they haven't asked you to? Do you replay old arguments in your head as if you're trying to win a case from childhood? If yes, then you're not loving. You're seeking resolution. Projection loves to dress itself in passion, drama, and cosmic significance. But real love feels quieter. It allows difference. It allows slowness. It allows two people to see each other, not just as wish fulfillment, but as entire, complicated, changing human beings. But seeing someone clearly requires one hard thing: letting go of who you wanted them to be. That's where love begins, not in fantasy, but in presence. Take a breath now. Let it settle in your chest. Exhale gently through your mouth as if blowing away the fog on glass. You may realize something in this room, that you've spent years in relationships not with people, but with images of them. That you've said, "They changed," when really, you just started seeing more of them. That you've blamed yourself for not being loved fully, when really they weren't capable of giving more than the projection allowed. But that's not your failure. That's the nature of projection. It turns people into mirrors. And mirrors, by definition, only show what's already inside you. So here's the invitation. Instead of asking, "Why didn't they love me?" ask, "What part of me was trying to love itself through them?" Because that part is still waiting, still worthy, still yours. You don't need someone else to complete that loop. You can meet that part directly, in stillness, in breath, in truth. And when you do, the projection begins to lift. You see the person for who they are. Sometimes they stay, sometimes they leave, but you no longer need to chase or cling, because now you're not trying to win someone. You're trying to witness them, and maybe, just maybe, they'll do the same for you. Not a projection, just you. You step from the room without fanfare, but something inside you has quieted, and in that quiet, there is space. You step into this next room already wearing a costume, not intentionally, but you've worn it so long it barely feels like a disguise anymore. This is the room of the role you never auditioned for. You walk through it remembering countless moments when you offered support before it was asked for, when you apologized before anyone blamed you, when you took on someone else's chaos as your quiet responsibility. You weren't born a fixer, a caretaker, a peacemaker, a ghostbuster. You became one because someone had to, and no one else in the room knew how. You were the child who read the room before you knew how to read words, the one who sensed tension, swallowed needs, made yourself smaller so others could be okay. And the applause? It came in silence. You weren't praised for your sacrifice. You were expected to keep making it. Over time, the role merged with identity. You didn't just play the hero. You believed you had to be one to be loved. You didn't just soothe others. You began thinking their pain was your fault to fix. This, too, is an attachment pattern, and it's a seductive one. Because when you make others feel better, They cling to you. And that feels like connection. But it's not connection. It's dependency dressed as intimacy. You confuse being needed with being loved. And the more they unravel, the more vital you feel. Until one day you realize you've never actually been held. You've just been holding, again and again. You say you want partnership, but unconsciously you pick people who need rescue. Because as long as they're broken, you have a role. And if you have a role, maybe you'll be indispensable. And if you're indispensable, maybe you'll never be left. But the tragedy is this: you're never truly chosen, only used in sacred disguise. Take a breath here. Let your shoulders drop. Notice if your jaw has been clenching. If you've been rehearsing someone else's feelings inside your own head. Let go for just a moment. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your family needed. Not who your partner depended on. Not who your inner child thought they had to become to survive. But who you are when no one is watching. That person is quieter, less impressive, but far more real." In this room you begin to question the costume, the need to always be composed, to always be generous, to always anticipate the moods of others before they even speak. You begin to ask, if I wasn't fixing everything, would I still be loved? And the part of you that's terrified says, maybe not. But another part, softer, older than your fear, whispers, then maybe that wasn't love. Maybe you were cast in a role, and you performed so well no one ever asked who you were beneath the mask. But you can ask now. You can begin to retire the role, not with bitterness, but with reverence. Because that mask protected you. It gave you purpose. It kept you close to people who didn't know how to hold you otherwise. But now you're ready to be held without earning it. You're ready to disappoint someone and still be loved. You're ready to show up messy, uncertain, unfinished, and still be worthy. You walk out of the room not as a hero, or a helper, or a healer. You walk out simply human. No script, just presence, and the sacred risk of being known. This next room is lined with echoes, not just of what you've heard, but of what you've taught others to believe about you. A partner's complaint that you're too distant, a friend who says you never really need anything, a look someone gives you when you say, "Don't worry, I'm fine." This is the room where you realize you taught others how to miss you, not intentionally. But through every moment you denied a need, downplayed a feeling, disguised discomfort with a smile. You taught them what version of you to respond to. You showed up as reliable, unshakable, low maintenance, endlessly giving. And they believed you, even when it was a performance, even when it was a survival strategy, even when inside you were aching for someone to finally ask, "But how are you really?" But no one asks, because you trained them not to. And now you feel unseen, but you also feel complicit. How do you grieve the disconnection you helped maintain? This is one of the cruel paradoxes of insecure attachment. You hide your needs out, of fear they won't be met. But by hiding them, you ensure they never can be. You long to be chosen, but you hide the parts of you that would let someone know what choosing you really looks like. You want closeness, but you mask vulnerability so well that even those who want to love you don't know how to reach you. You trained them, gently, unconsciously, skillfully, to keep their distance even when they thought they were close. And the worst part, you resent them for it, and then blame yourself for resenting them. You begin to wonder, am I the reason I never feel fully loved? Take a breath. Let the air reach your lower belly. Exhale through slightly parted lips, like releasing the tension of an old role you didn't ask to play. There's no shame in adaptation. You learned to protect yourself in the only way you knew how, to become easy, agreeable, safe, for others. But now, it's time to become true, for yourself. That means unlearning the habit of managing everyone else's comfort before your own. It means letting someone see the version of you that isn't perfect. It means risking the moment when they might not understand, and staying anyway, because only then will you know if it's real. There's a practice in some forms of therapy called rupture and repair. It teaches that conflict is not a sign of failure, it's an opportunity for deeper connection. But when you never let anyone close enough to rupture, you never give them a chance to repair. And so your relationships stay shallow. Even when they look deep, you might have dozens of friends, an adoring partner, a family that brags about how strong you are. But you still feel alone, because no one's holding the real you. And whose fault is that? Not theirs, not yours. Just the pattern. Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." So, here's the invitation. Begin saying what's true before it's polished. Begin asking for what you need, before you've rationalized it away. Begin letting someone see the parts of you you were taught to hide. Not all of them. Not all at once. Just enough to challenge the illusion that you don't require care, because you do. And it's not weakness. It's honesty. It's intimacy. It's the beginning of retraining the world how to relate to you. Not as the caretaker, the rock, the invisible support beam, but as someone who breathes, bleeds, breaks, and rebuilds. Someone real. You step out of the room quietly, not ashamed, not afraid. Just newly aware that love isn't just about being chosen. It's about being known, and knowing begins when you stop pretending not to need it. The room you enter now is dim, but not from darkness. It's dim the way a dream is dim. Soft edges, shifting outlines. A sense that something just out of reach is finally beginning to form. This is where something changes. This is the moment of rupture. This is the room where you begin breaking the spell mid-dream. Up until now, your patterns have played out like clockwork. You've chased the same archetypes, spoken the same apologies, performed the same emotional contortions. You've told yourself, this is just how I love, or this is who I'm drawn to. But tonight, something doesn't land. The attraction feels thinner. The silence feels louder. The old thrill doesn't thrill anymore. This is what awakening looks like. Not loud, not sudden. It's a soft inner click, a moment where something inside you whispers, "Wait, this isn't what I thought it was." And for the first time, you don't override that voice. You don't rationalize. You don't chase. You don't rehearse one more apology that masks your truth. Instead, you sit. And in the sitting, something sacred happens. Recognition. Not just of the pattern, but of the self beneath the pattern. You begin to see the space between stimulus and response, between the text that doesn't come and your old impulse to blame yourself, between the dismissive tone and your need to fix it, between the distance and your urge to collapse into self-doubt. You begin to notice that anxiety is not always a cue to act, that longing is not always a map to follow, that attraction is not always a signal of alignment. You start to feel the difference between what is real and what is familiar. And this awareness, it isn't comfortable. It's grief, because waking up means you have to grieve the story you've been living inside, the one where you were unworthy unless chosen, the one where love had to be earned through effort, the one where being seen was dangerous. You don't just lose the illusion, you lose the identity that grew around it, and that can feel disorienting, like waking from a deep sleep and not knowing which dream was yours. Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But you're not avoiding anymore. You're staying. With the ache, with the quiet, with the truth. That's the bravest thing you've ever done. Because when you stay present with what hurts, without running, blaming, fixing, you begin to rewrite the map, not by force, by feeling. The dream begins to dissolve. The old roles no longer fit. The intensity no longer hypnotizes. The drama no longer calls to you. Instead, you find yourself craving something unfamiliar. Stillness, stability, softness. Not because you become dull, but because you've become clear. The spell doesn't break all at once. It frays at the edges. It fades. It loses its power the moment you name it and say, "I see you, and I choose differently now." You take a breath. Let it move all the way down into your spine. Let it release through your mouth like a secret you've carried too long. The dream doesn't need to end in fire. It can end in waking. You don't need to burn the past. You just need to stop believing it's your only story, and in that, you begin to write a new one. Not with perfect words, but with presence. You leave this room slowly, no slamming doors, no bitter goodbyes, just the soft certainty that you don't need to play the dream again because now, you're awake. The next room feels like a clearing. No heavy curtains, no distorted mirrors, no echoes bouncing off the walls. Just air, just space, just enough silence to notice that for once, there's no tension in your chest. This is where something gentle takes root, where the old stories don't vanish, but they stop steering. This is the room where you begin loving without the echo. It's quieter here, and that quiet feels strange at first. You're used to love coming with chaos, used to reading between texts, interpreting sighs, managing moods. Now, there's stillness. No one pulling away, no one demanding more, and you find yourself waiting for the shoe to drop. Because somewhere, deep inside, you still wonder, can love really be this calm, this mutual, this boring? But it's not boring, it's regulated. This is what it feels like when you're not swimming upstream inside someone else's storm. But that storm used to be your weather. You grew up forecasting moods, adjusting tones, carrying umbrellas just in case. And now, you don't know what to do with all this ease. There's no one to rescue, no one to prove yourself to, no invisible game to decode. Just someone who shows up, consistently, gently, and says, I'm here. At first, you don't trust it. You search for signs of abandonment. You poke at the connection, waiting to be ignored. You test boundaries, just to feel something. And when they don't react the way the others did, a strange part of you panics. Because the echo isn't there, the echo of unworthiness, of striving, of performing. But stay with that discomfort. Let it breathe. You are not broken for mistrusting peace. You are simply unpracticed in receiving love that doesn't cost you something. This is when the healing gets real. Not when you say you want better, but when you stop walking away from what is already here. This is the moment when your nervous system begins to uncoil, when the high alert finally powers down, when connection begins to feel like oxygen, not fire. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And here's the key. Transformation doesn't always come from rupture. Sometimes it comes from staying with someone who sees you even when you're not shining, who holds space for your quiet, who doesn't confuse your softness with weakness. You might feel guilt for receiving. You might apologize for needing. You might feel like you owe them something for being so kind, but you don't, because this isn't a transaction. This is intimacy. It doesn't demand a performance. It simply invites your presence. Let yourself settle into this new rhythm. Let the quiet be a sanctuary instead of a threat. Let connection feel like an open field, not a maze you have to solve. And slowly, you begin to realize you no longer crave the echo. You no longer chase ghosts. You no longer need the ache to feel alive. You are here, and that is enough. You leave this room, not with triumph, not with fanfare, but with a softness that says, I'm learning to stay. And in that staying, you are learning to love, not as a rescue mission, not as a performance, but as an unfolding. This final room is not really a room at all. There are no walls here, no echoes, no ghosts, just air, fresh and uncharged. It stretches in all directions, as if waiting for you to walk without script or shadow. This is the space where something old releases its grip. This is the moment when the pattern lets go. It doesn't happen with a bang. There's no dramatic breakthrough, no tearful climax, just an exhale, a pause, a subtle recognition that you are no longer acting out the same story. For years, perhaps decades, you believed you were choosing your partners, your friends, your attachments. But now you know, it was never choice. It was choreography. A dance passed down through silence and absence, through glances never returned, through lessons never spoken, but deeply learned. You didn't choose your patterns. But now, for the first time, you're choosing to unweave them, and that choice, it's not loud. It's not glamorous. It's made in small moments. When you stop yourself from sending that message meant to provoke a reply, when you allow discomfort without spiraling into self-blame, when you let someone love you, even when the echo of not enough starts whispering. It's made in the pause between reaction and response, in the breath you take before repeating a script that no longer serves you. Let yourself take that breath now. Feel the way the air enters. Not urgently, not defensively, but with quiet welcome. This is your body adjusting to safety. Not the safety of another's approval, but the safety of your own presence. There's a temptation still to revisit the old pattern one more time, to test it, to confirm that the lesson has truly been learned. But that's the last trick of the unconscious. It asks for repetition as proof of growth. You don't owe it that. Growth is not about revisiting the pain. It's about outgrowing the need for its familiarity. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You choose now. You choose to love without rescuing, to stay without collapsing, to walk away without guilt, to desire without obsession, to need without shame. These are radical acts when you've spent a lifetime proving your worth. And now, you don't need to prove. You just need to be. The pattern lets go not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped feeding it. And when it loosens its grip, you don't fall. You rise, not as someone new, but as someone undistorted by all the roles you thought you had to play. You are still tender, still growing, still rewiring, but you are no longer repeating. And that difference, it's everything. You turn away from this room not because you're fleeing it, but because you finally absorbed the lesson it held. There's no graduation ceremony, just the quiet click of a door that no longer needs to be opened. And now, you return to where you began. Not to the same room, not quite, but to the same breath, the same body. Only now, it holds a little more space, space where the pattern used to live, where anxiety used to nest, where confusion once echoed. That space is yours now. Let it be filled. Not with noise, not with effort, but with presence. You've traced a long, invisible line, through memories, through roles, through shadows. You've sat with ghosts and seen how they shaped your love. But the greatest shift wasn't in understanding the past. It was in interrupting its cycle, in pausing mid-sentence, in breathing mid-reaction, in letting the old hunger rise. And not feeding it this time, because healing doesn't mean you never feel the pull again. It means you stop calling it destiny. It means you recognize that not every ache is an invitation. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every stranger who feels like home is home, and you are not an echo. You are the voice. Let that voice speak gently now, not to explain, not to perform, but simply to whisper, "I'm here. I stayed. I chose differently." Let the light fade soft around you now. Let your eyes grow heavier. Let the old script curl at the edges like a page you finished reading, and when you wake, let it be with a heart that doesn't need to be chased, only listened to. End of script. Sweet dreams.